Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. We're excited to have everybody here. Just wanted to welcome everybody as well as welcome our North Carolina chapter members who have joined us. Can everybody see our screen? If so, give me a thumbs up. Perfect. All right. Yeah, thank you so much to the North Carolina chapter and the members who have joined our collective call here. We're thrilled to have you. We also like to thank our sponsor, Travel Boom, for contributing to today's webinar. Really didn't want to take a whole lot of time, so we're going to get straight into it, but I did want to highlight some key members of the HSMAI South Carolina chapter. We thank them all for their contributions. If you're interested in learning more about the chapter or want to join, we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. So let's get right into it, the secrets to exploding revenue through dynamic pricing. And I'm going to turn it back over to JL to kick things off.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jason. I just wanted to take a minute today to introduce and thank our awesome panelists for joining us. We've got three really diverse perspectives. I'm going to shut off this other audio. Can you guys still hear me okay? Okay, good. All right, so we've got Trever Stuart-Hill from Revenue Matters, CEO and founder. Trever is a legend in our field, so I'm sure most people on the call know Trever, but if you don't, and I did get the opportunity to just meet Trever from this event, he's definitely, every minute with him is a treat. So thank you, Trever, for joining us. He's on the advisory board for HSMAI for revenue management, and he has a lot of, insights coming from his long career and leading Revenue Matters. Thanks, Trever. You want to say hi to everybody? I don't know if they can see you. If you say hi.
Hey, everybody. Thanks very much. Very kind introduction. Thank you very much, JL. Pleased to be here.
And can you tell everybody where you're joining from?
Yeah, I'm in Denver today, just looking outside the window as a snowstorm is about to dump on us. So I'm going to take full advantage and make a few turns up at Beaver Creek tomorrow, if all goes well. So that's the intent.
Right. That's awesome. Awesome. So next is Patrick Matheson, and Patrick is here in Charleston, Mount Pleasant, with where we are, where Adele, and myself. So we've got some local contingency here, even though we're not physically together today. And Patrick has had most of his career with Destination Hotels and Resorts, Two Roads, and then now it's all combined in Hyatt. But he's been at multiple properties with a lot of focus on, the hybrid inventory with the vacation rental, the condo hotel, and hotels and resorts, now all inside the Hyatt portfolio, which is a big part of what we're looking at is managing different types of inventory, different markets with different systems today. So he's got some real hands-on examples to share. So thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us. If you want to say hi to everybody too.
Yes, hi. Thank you for the introduction as well. It's good to be here today. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. And last but not least, certainly is my lovely colleague, Heather Richer. And Heather is joining us today with a lot of storied hats and a long and dynamic career in revenue management, coming from the hotel side. First, one of her crown jewels that was my girl crush on her about a decade ago when she was head of revenue at Kempton, that then became IHG. And then we've met our paths have crossed as she came into more of the short-term rental industry where I've spent most of my career. And she's now has her own consulting firm, Richer Logic, and she's got some really, really great perspectives in working on this with her portfolio and her past experience. So welcome, Heather. Say hello.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and this will be a really dynamic conversation too with all of our different backgrounds. So looking forward to jumping in.
Awesome.
I do think Heather has the best last name for somebody who's involved in driving top line.
Yeah, I did marry into it. I have to say, I got lucky there.
Awesome. Well, let's get to it. Really, just to point out a few goals for today. This session, one of the reasons that we brought this group together is because we didn't want this to be like another session, another webinar for you guys that we kind of see, kind of it's like an old worn out tire, right? But this session we're calling out some problems that we all face, because revenue management is a complicated field. There's a lot of manual, spreadsheets are everyone's best friend. We all know that. We say this all the time, but we need new tools. It's 2022. Things are changing. Portfolios are drastically changing, whether, whatever side of the spectrum of lodging that you come from, everything has converged and we need multiple tools. So let's talk about those tools, and let's talk about what you've done with those tools and the tactics that have been successful. We want to give you that. The others is we want to give you a hard list of data resources to help you have the best toolkit that you can for your pricing strategy, because we know that there's more and more coming out there, and there's still not comprehensive tools. And the third is to really get some great insights on what is a forecast on a shift and what we're going to see moving forward, what we think our esteemed panelists, what they think, and then what we think is a separate temporary trend that is something that maybe is fading out or was only for, the time periods of the in-between, in our waves of the pandemic over the last 2 years. So let's get started. I kind of want to start on the first point there on kind of calling out, what are some of the trends, and whoever wants to start, that you experienced, guys, in your portfolios that were different in terms of pricing tools and tactics over the last 2 years, and where are you seeing those remaining, or are you seeing those being done for now that we're pretty much on the last wave here? So I'm going to turn that over to Patrick first.
Yeah, thank you. I think old problems, well, maybe they're not old, but they're a little more pronounced, is revenue management systems and their accuracy and their product recommendations, rate recommendations, you name it. We find that hotels that are turning on any automatic pricing and revenue management systems may have some worry, and in many cases, if they're not babysitting the system, if you're on a revenue management system, the work and the labor that's involved in teaching it certain events, teaching it to ignore certain things, including comp set pricing on certain days of the week. So there's much more manual intervention required these days based on 2 years of really wonky data, likely 2020 with just poor performance. Last year could have been great, especially for most of the people on this call in the Carolinas. But is that going to continue? And I know we're touching on that later on in this conversation too. But I think the revenue management system aspect is a key one. And if you don't have one, it might be a tricky time to look into it, but it's also a great time to look into it, given all the manual work that can be done otherwise, and where you can better spend your time. Since so many of us got stretched thin, might be covering multiple hotels, might not have the same support staff as in the past. So I'd pronounce all that just in the very fundamentals of revenue management and how unreliable it might be right now, and that it requires us to consider looking at different comp set hotels, different pieces of data, new emerging players in the business intelligence and other analytics tools. So I think that's something that we should all be aware of.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too, JL, if you will, too. I think what Patrick said is pretty accurate. The difference between today's shock to the industry compared to other shocks that, and I think you alluded it to this in the introduction. I'm as old as dirt, but so I've gone through a few shocks in the industry, but the most recent one being the financial crisis, right? And that was really an economic shock. It really had an impact on demand. It really had a tremendous drain on the industry, and it was really from a pricing strategy perspective, the revenue management systems as well as revenue managers themselves that are operating in a manual environment. It's really a race to the bottom in terms of pricing. Today's shock, because of COVID, plus the fact that there's been a lot of economic stimulus put into the economy, we're really not seeing the same kind of impact on demand. In fact, I think a lot of us, unless you're a city center, big box property, or a big convention center, you're actually probably seeing a resurgence of demands. And that combined with some discretionary spend on the part of travelers means that pricing could be held a little higher. And I think today's recalibration, there's a lot of smart people working with revenue management solutions They're retooling some of their algorithms and what have you. And so that race to the bottom that we experienced in 2008, 2009 is just not there today. And that bodes well for the industry. So, I think Patrick's right. For your own individual application, for your own street corner strategy that you're focused on, definitely there's probably a little bit more either re-education back into the RMS, or if you're in a manual environment, you're probably doing things a little bit more, finding ways to become a little bit more streamlined, but it's not the same race to the bottom from a pricing perspective.
Thanks, Trevor. Heather, do you have anything to add there?
I would just maybe summarize a little bit of what Patrick said as well, is that, how accurate. So this is just kind of something I always like to say. If you have an accurate forecast, you can have an accurate strategy, right? So and it's hard. Accurate forecasting has always been hard. And with COVID, it's like crazy uncertainty, right? But how you go about getting the most accurate forecast you can is at the core. And so if you're using the technology or not, you still have that human review. And I know we're going to get into this. Maybe this is a little preview, but the idea that your creativity in what you look at to get an accurate forecast, right? Obviously event calendars, things like that, but are there other top of funnel data sources? Have you found that through COVID, you've been talking to your marketing team more in digital and looking at, shopping trends to inform and I know some folks were looking at COVID data, right? And, that just how we've gotten more creative to get better at that accurate forecast and retooling the system's algorithms, right? It's challenged operators, strategists, as well as the technology providers. So anyway, I think that's kind of the fundamental core though, right? Accurate forecast gets you an accurate strategy.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm just going to throw this out there to you guys just to share with the group, because we do want to talk about what you have been using. Can you guys share what your a new tool that has been your best, addition to your revenue management forecasting toolkit? Is there something that stands out that you didn't have previously that now you're I can't live without this, or this has been super helpful and I want to use this moving forward?
I could speak to a tool that's probably not new to anybody, but TravelClick and all their suite of products, not to tout one particular one, but it's the most well-known, and they've done a great job of referencing data not only from a year ago, but 2 years ago now at this point. So we can now look at our future indexes, for example, against our given comp set versus now, last year, 2 years ago. So it's much more relevant. And, that's done in a very high level way, but it helps when speaking to any ownership groups or anyone of interest that wants to know our future positioning, and helps us internally, of course, to know how that's going. Because, relative to last year may not be as accurate anymore or as useful. So that and their Revenue Strategy 360 program, they just announced in the past, maybe the last 2 weeks, that Agency 360 also has a vacation rental component. So you can now look at pace within markets of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom breakdowns when you have Agency 360 to see how those are feeding in. And that's pulling in more of our data from third-party channels, Airbnb, Vrbo, things like that. So it's more helpful to look at a holistic perspective and not just hotels, because I think most of us on this call are in markets that have a lot of crossover for that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And speaking of crossover, on that inventory, do you get stay type data? Does it say what type of stay it is, or is it just showing you on those reports that it's booked?
Just booked. I just started playing with it this week. It looked like it was only just booked. So I think getting into it more, they might be able to elaborate more. I feel like it's very new in its concept, but another way to look at it. So, sure, many of us have heard of AirDNA as a product, and that's at least helpful for understanding occupancy and compression periods, but not as helpful as true paid versus stayed versus true ADRs on the books. And there are other tools coming up which we're exploring, which hopefully we can have some success into, but that's definitely an emerging market overall is the vacation rental business intelligence and getting data from PMSs that's more reliable and helpful for people versus the scraping of websites that they're doing today.
I think that the biggest change too that we're seeing is, historically everything was relying on historical data. What happened yesterday or what happened last month, and then there was sort of this backcast review of what could we do better or differently, and then try and apply that and extrapolate that for future periods. And I think a lot of new data sources are in the marketplace now. STAR's moving into more of a future-looking reporting. I know Calibri Labs is an excellent resource. Focusing mainly on chain properties today. I know they have sites on independence at some point in the future as well, but just sort of getting a general pulse of what future demand trends look like is really helpful. There's a lot of new, news feeds and news articles and, listening in on earnings calls from major companies and things. All of that is really instructional and something that maybe we hadn't been as focused on in the past that we're beginning to focus on now as a result of the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add, I've heard the term the great convergence. I like to kind of use that too. And the idea that it's the entire accommodations industry, right? Like it's not an alternative accommodation anymore. And so Patrick, to your point, that you're now like seeing what was traditionally a hotel tool expand to include this like other accommodation in inventory data, and that it matters, right? It's like there's a correlation there. If you can understand what's happening with that type of inventory, can it help you better understand how to manage just traditional hotel inventory? But also one thing that's interesting, and I can maybe name a few other tools, JL, if you like, more like how to get to that data, but supply in that space changes all the time. So like if you're in a market like Charlotte, right, and you think like it matters, like people are coming and they're looking at all kinds of accommodations. If there were 100 of those units 6 months ago and now there's 200 because there's more inventory that's come on, that's how like flexible, like in the hotel world, you see the hotel pipeline and then it takes a year to build the hotel, right? And now that with short-term rental, if you're in a market where that matters, getting a pulse on how supply is changing starts to be really important too. Yeah. So the travel click report that Patrick mentioned is great. There's also AirDNA, of course, and then Transparent. And I think Transparent actually is the partner to that travel click product. I remember that correctly. And then another interesting, like newer one is Price Labs, and they have a separate market dashboard product that's actually pretty affordable. So those are kind of three out there. And then there's Key Data Dashboard. And to your point about, well, do you want to get more than just scrape data? Key Data is building the integrations with the traditional vacation rental PMSs. So if you really want to see like actualized booking data that is, syndicated in that way, that's a company that's out there trying to do that. So the value of their product varies market by market, depending on participation. So just to name a few. Yeah.
Heather, you brought up something that I thought was pretty interesting. So we've always talked about, and I know our conversation today is around Dynamite dynamic pricing. Typically, dynamic pricing followed demand. It was demand-based pricing, based on demand. But really what you're referring to here is that we have to pay attention now, not only to demand environment, but also the supply environment. And that's always been a bit of a challenge, but more so now in this great convergence environment that we find ourselves in. So I think there's a great point that you brought forward there.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Moving on from the data point, and we'll get to that later. And for everybody on the call and everyone that's going to watch the recording, we are going to combine a list and send that out of these data resources so everyone can have that as a takeaway. But really what I want to find out and hear from the panelists is some specific examples that they faced of at their properties or in portfolios they're managing that have to do with this paradigm of what changed. Did the traveler change? Did the type of stay change? And what is, and I really we don't want to focus too much on the past, but like what's working now what is selling now? What are the forecasts? What's on the books now for these different types of pricing and promotions that you've put in over the last 2 years?
Well,
Go ahead, Patrick.
oh, sorry. I'll touch on two examples I can share of what happened in the past year. Well, from a high level, we of course saw people in, I don't like the term bleisure, but that definitely became what it's been known as before, is people blending work and traditional leisure vacations, bringing their family along with them, knowing that during an environment where offices were closed in most locations, they're allowed to work from anywhere, and they spent time at our resorts, and therefore would stay for longer periods, and also would want to have connecting rooms. So out of that came some ability from a high perspective to book connecting rooms online, to guarantee that these two rooms you can book at once, whether it's the price of the two combined or slightly reduced or even increased price. You could manage that discount or increase. That was something the hotels were able to leverage on a booking channel and produce great results for a lot of resort locations. And those are 5-night stays or more. And also with that, prior to really last summer, it was Hyatt that came out with a work from Hyatt package, and Wild Dunes, for example, I know they're on the call. They jumped in on some of that, and there was a lot of PR push behind it that came with certain amenities like a guaranteed workspace, whether it was another room or a meeting space, waived resort fees, discount off of F&B. So it kind of takes a lot of the ease away, because some people want to work from a hotel room, however, may not want to be in that same 400 square foot box all day. So they want to have a little space to play with and have privacy if their family's there, for example. So those were a couple PR things that went really well and are just probably here to stay. I mean, they were to end by December last year. Now they're just probably evergreen at this point until we see a return to the workspace and it's not needed anymore.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I wonder too, has anyone seen, just this is a off the cuff question, has anyone seen any type of integration into marketplaces for buying, hotel type inventory as workspaces? Is there a new, have we seen any filters or options to search for that? Because I haven't, and I feel like that could be really, really great.
Like a peer space? Is that maybe what you're getting at? Like a channel like that where people go to just find space?
I think even on the traditional OTA searches.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Traditional, just like throwing it in there. I mean, I think, to me, the best use of it is using obviously with loyalty and offering it, with your higher tiered members, that they can have it reduced or as a bonus, for a certain tier. But I think there's opportunities still there to really call out from top level with searches for what folks are wanting for. I mean, that's kind of a different topic altogether, but I think that's kind of one of the big shifts we could say, is that what people are looking for is not necessarily caught up to what the buying and, the marketplaces, whether if it's on a wholesale side or on, a top level OTA or even a top level Google search or inside of loyalty programs inside of, say like the World of Hyatt. Like, we need to make sure that what folks want is right there for them to buy whatever marketplace they're in.
And I think that's incumbent also on internal marketing efforts, right? And so if you look at the great convergence, not only of inventory, but also function. What I mean by that is revenue management, distribution, digital marketing, and those that are really supporting that top line revenue performance for various assets, being able to collaborate in a more unique fashion. And I'd also include operations in that, getting that feedback loop based on guest inquiries that you're getting at the desk and other conversations that are happening on site, being able to create that feedback loop and bring that to the marketplace as well, based on those individual client needs. That's a unique opportunity that we have, that maybe, we have the potential to be ahead of major third-party distribution channels in that regard.
Nice. And there's a nice comment from Ryan Clemens, one of our advisory board members with IHG, saying that they've experienced the request for this. And again, it's just the challenge of being able to manage it manage the inventory to sell the rooms that way for workspaces.
JL, we're starting to see some other things across our portfolio, and just from a context perspective, we are really predominantly in the independent space where properties sort of have their own unique story to tell. So they really stand alone from a competitive perspective in many respects. We have a bit of a dichotomy in a couple different metrics. So if you look at length of stay, we're definitely seeing longer lengths of stay. We're now seeing longer length of stay, at least as it relates to business combined with leisure or leisure. So Thursday is really now part of the weekend, whereas before it was really sort of strictly Friday, Saturday kind of stays. We're also seeing some interesting shifts as business travel begins to recover. So Sabre just released some statistics yesterday, actually, indicating that business travel is back to about 50% of 2019 levels. It was seeing some really strong recovery in November. It tapered off as the Omicron variant came into play here, and now they're starting to see a resurgence in that regard. So as a result, we're now seeing a shift from a sort of a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday stay pattern. We're actually seeing really Wednesday one-night stays, whereas Tuesday used to be the peak night for us midweek. We're actually seeing Wednesday as a peak night from a business perspective. So that's kind of an interesting shift. And also Sunday is becoming a little bit more important as well, at least from the data that Calibre Labs is sharing.
Nice. Trevor, I just went ahead and kind of pulled up your slides that you had wanted to show this good. I think this is kind of a good time to kind of bring back to core and show how these different pickups are happening in the example that you just shared about the days.
Yeah, great. Yeah, happy to jump in on this. So I guess the question is, we're talking about the dynamic pricing, and there may be somebody listening in here that's really more of a static pricing environment where they're trying to predict the future, which is a very difficult thing to do, and have their pricing set for this next calendar year. And you're a little bit vulnerable if you're in that environment. So on the left-hand side here, we have what we call static pricing. So you have just a static price that's standard, and you'll be able to sell based on your demand curve, whatever that quantity might look like. And this demand curve will shift day by day, obviously because demand does shift. And then to Heather's point earlier, supply is now also shifting as well. So that's going to have an impact on where that demand curve lies. And then to add to that, your competitors are also moving prices around you potentially. And so you've got a lot of dynamics that are happening. And so your revenue potential, which is that peach color, I guess, whatever that color is going to be dictated by some of those external factors. When you move into a dynamic pricing environment, you'll have if you go back to the previous slide for a second, thank you. You'll have your kind of core revenue potential, but as you're taking a look at these other factors and you put in fencing around different price points and different types of guests are looking for different types of things, I'll come back to that in just a minute, you're able to generate some extra revenue. So you're kind of filling out the area underneath the demand curve. And as a result, as long as there isn't cannibalization or people migrating from one yellow bucket into the pink bucket or vice versa, then from a revenue potential perspective, you're really optimizing your performance on a nightly basis at your property, given the units that you have available to you. So that's the sort of theoretical concept in terms of why we're even talking about dynamic pricing to begin with. Some interesting things that we're starting to see, though, in terms of trends, booking windows are incredibly short in most destinations. We're finding, compared to 2019 or 18 even, booking windows are really shortening quite a bit, with the exception of private homes and condos and villas and suites and Patrick had said some connecting unit types. People traveling together as families or what have you. We're seeing a broadening of that booking window, an advanced booking window. But the other thing that's really unique is that we're seeing a really short-term booking window for those same kind of reservations as well. So there's almost like two different types of audiences that we can potentially cater to and potentially price to based on demand and also what the timing of when they're booking, coming back to what you were saying earlier, JL.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Trevor. And I think when we were speaking before, before we had this event today, that Patrick also had some really interesting things to share about that within his portfolios, based off of, his own personal experience and what was going on with the secondary effect of the rates and demand is there's the other things that are tangential to the market. I know I experienced this myself when I was traveling in the summer of 2020, is that I was able to get accommodations and I had kind of a drive situation, but you've got how you get to the destination, so flying or driving, and then you also have what you do there. So it's like, is this dynamic pricing with these different, these different conditions going on, how is it going to impact the rest of the way that you get your demand to where you are? So kind of turning that over to Patrick for some good examples.
Yeah, thanks. So I cover Latin America and the Caribbean, which requires a flight to get to everywhere. And we've noticed future demand looks very strong. Bookings look strong. And then we might see a fall off within the 30-day window or so, 30, 45, 60-day window. And thought maybe that's due to people being concerned about CDC guidance on travel, whatever. You try and read into it, but also a big factor is certainly the flight supply. That has been throttled due to staffing, everything you can think of. We know routes are being cut, routes are being consolidated. And once we start getting airport stats and airport price and start shopping pricing year over year, it becomes a little evident that that's obviously a big factor too, that people may be booking their hotel room quickly. That doesn't require a big commitment, maybe a 7-day cancel and no deposit due up front. However, when it comes time to really find your flight, because that tends to have more variability and fluctuations, they may just decide, look, this isn't the right destination. I can't get there at a reasonable price. So we're seeing people kind of timid with that, and it might impact hotels and therefore result in better short-term drive market pickup. So it sounds odd to have that kind of a trade-off, but it is real, especially in the Southeast. People may be considering a Caribbean destination. That looks unreasonable last minute. Let me pivot and drive somewhere to more like a 3 to 5 hour destination. So that's definitely a real challenge for us. So we're getting a little bit more intel and trying to figure out how we can marry the data of website traffic, call volume, flight demand, all that into one to really get a better perspective of future demand.
One thing I love about these types of sessions is you get to learn from everybody. And I learned something from Heather in our preparation conversation that we had yesterday as it relates to flight data and a product called Forward Keys. And so that's something that I think we're going to investigate as a company to see if it may help us with some of our fly-in markets.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I looked into them years ago and then recently now are using them to do kind of what you're talking about, Patrick, right? It's if you can understand if they're adding flights, taking them away year over year, and if you can understand like if the costs are going up or down, how is there causation or correlation, right? And like, you have to put your data science hat on. If you want to use it, like you said, like creating these models of like, how is this top of funnel, how to use it, right? And it could vary by market. Obviously, flight data isn't relevant in drive-to markets, but in the fly-to islands, like almost critical, right? And if you can understand that, you can have a more accurate forecast. So yeah, there's another one, Trevor, I'll look it up for you. That's airline data I have. But Forward Keys I know is one I've used now and has been around a long time. I'll see if I can find that other one.
And the other one that you had mentioned too was the Predict HQ.
Yes.
Interesting as well from special events perspective and what have you. That's an interesting data source.
Yeah, and I think some of the revenue management systems, like if you use Ideas or Duetto or something, I think they've maybe considered using that data. I'm not sure any of them actually do, but like certainly manually, if you want to like look at it, right, can be really valuable.
We've got some manual shops even people are doing, and they've been doing this for years. So Hawaii is always concerned about what's the flight price from Seattle, from LA, and they're keeping records of that, and they can say, well, it's now $200 more than it was even a year ago. So that definitely factors in. It's not so much COVID restrictions anymore. It's just like the ability to get somewhere. And if I may, I saw Jack's question. It's a great one. Reservation stacking is it's been hard to quantify, but we did do it for festive to get a sense of how many people, even within our own Hyatts, are holding multiple reservations. and it was a pretty big number. We could run one report, which a match back, see who's holding multiple reservations at multiple of our hotels for this week. And it was a surprising amount of several hundred people doing so, because then we had to call them and say, look, we noticed you're holding a reservation in Mexico and you're holding one in Aruba, for example. Where are you staying? So, and we were actually able to identify, they get some people to make their decisions. So that's a phenomenon we're noticing too, is last minute, people are going to make that decision because they got a flexible policy of where do I want to go now? And that's probably always been the case, but it was something we were just a little more attuned to during that time.
You know, what's really interesting is when we're talking about this reservation stacking challenge, which you have visibility into with multiple properties within the portfolio. But the other challenge is last minute churn or wash or cancellations, right? So, you know, guests today, I think there's a broad assumption, oh my goodness, plans can change, therefore I want flexibility in policies and we better be flexible with our policies. And I think that's possible. And we're certainly seeing that in a lot of our properties in our portfolio. Maybe that top yellow box that we're looking at here, that premium price extra revenue, maybe you should be paying or charging for that flexibility. And then the other aspect is there's a surprising number of people that are willing to lock themselves in fully advanced, truly advanced purchase, not just 7 days out, but truly advanced purchase, non-refundable. And there's an audience for that as well. And that would be the other yellow box, that discount price. So again, depending on your demand forecast for your particular unit type, which is also a new conversation that's beginning to happen, is that, you know, especially with the revenue management systems that are automated, but also sort of even in a manual environment, the demand patterns for individual unit types are very unique and very distinct. And being able to separate those from, let's say, your core inventory would be an important step to take. But as a result, based on that demand that you're anticipating for those specialty unit types, there may be a play as it relates to fully advanced, non-refundable for that target audience. And also there may be a play for reserving some of that inventory for last minute opportunistic travelers, but at a price premium.
I was just going to add one more thing to take it back to your question, Jayla, about like customer trends. And Patrick, you mentioned like longer stays. I think Trevor, you did too. There's a term I'm reading more called the midterm stay, right? It's like you have long-term lease and like short-term rental, but this midterm stay could be 1 month to 6 months. And so where you have that kind of inventory, any kind of residential, can you get the 30-night stay? And is there like a 30-night plus rate? And maybe, Trevor, to this graphic you have, right, can that fill your yellow boxes too? And that, you know, in markets, at least in the US, you know, becomes like tax-free. And there's this whole strategy around people looking for that like 30 nights or more. It's a kind of a different audience, right, and segment. And this, you know, the argument, right, is that there's just more of those people because they're like, yeah, I'm just going to go for the whole month of July. Mm-hmm. And so it's developing.
Work from home.
Yeah, totally.
Work from anywhere. You know, if you're in fintech, and maybe, you know, some considerations if you're traveling internationally, but, you know, that aside, that's what VPNs are for, I guess. People now do have the latitude to decide where they want to stay for extended periods of time. So absolutely, that should be a consideration if you've got that type of inventory.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to, you know, getting. We have 15 minutes left here, and there's a couple topics that I really want us to touch on for the, you know, to take away for thinking about the future. So we've talked about these different conditions. We've talked about changes in strategy. We talked about what's worked. We talked about how inventory mixes change. We talked about different data systems. We know that there's still really no consistency. But one of the big shifts too is like guest experience and the function of price, and also the massive labor shortage. So where are we moving in terms of where this becomes a function, what we're able to charge when rates are high and we've got labor low? Like, how is this sustainable? And what destinations, you know, are coming into the mix here? And are there new destinations that, you know, are going to be alternatives for travelers that we want to see, and that we need to start thinking about new destinations, new places for properties, new places for investment, with that ability to change supply? So kind of wanted to throw that out there. I think Trever had some really good examples and thoughts on that too.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot there. So let me take pieces of it, if I can. So, gosh, where should we start here on this?
Start with the function of the guest experience.
Yeah. I think that's a good.
How that is, parallel to the rate.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Some of our clients that we support are intentionally holding pricing high with the intention that, from a staffing perspective, they're not going to be able to accommodate, your full occupancy levels. That's beginning to change now, but for a time there, that was absolutely the case. So that was definitely sort of an interesting trend that sort of was short-lived, perhaps, but it also meant that they've learned a lot from that experience. And I think when it comes time to really start quoting groups and other things, they're realizing they're able to get a price premium for their product. So I think that is a trend that's likely to shift slightly, but I don't think we're going to see a lot of drops there. But as it relates to the guest experience, one of the things that we're finding quite interesting is there's a lot of emphasis on asking guests, irrespective of the channel which they booked, to put comments on TripAdvisor. And that's a valid strategy. TripAdvisor is an important channel from a social validation perspective. However, if you're not paying attention to what's going on with Booking.com or Expedia, some of the other channels where people are booking, and you're getting hit hard in those areas, then you're likely to lose your premium status or placement on the site or some other things as well. And again, I think we all might agree that direct to property business is better, but you also have to recognize the fact that we are likely to experience some ebbs and flows in terms of demand, right? And so we're going to need our third-party channel partners as well throughout the course of the year in a strategic way. So if you're not paying attention to those things, and you're not responding to guest reviews, or you're not asking your guests who are booking through those channels that had a good experience to go back to those channels to put their reviews there, that's you're pretty vulnerable. And if you're not even looking at your guest satisfaction scores coming back, there's definitely a correlation between price and guest satisfaction. And if you're not paying attention to that, then you're also vulnerable. So I said a lot in a short period of time. Hopefully that'll let me. So.
I was going to keep going with the price value, but that's kind of where you were going, right? Like price value, like as a guest, what do I expect? And if my expectations don't match, then I'm likely to leave bad reviews. That price value perception. It kind of leads to that, like, if you're trying to get rid of housekeeping or have no front desk 24/7, right? Like these staffing challenges, how do you do less housekeeping, things like that? The idea, like, can you turn a hotel into a short-term rental, but more from the digital guest perspective, right? Like, can you operate an asset so that the guest doesn't actually have to talk to anyone if they don't want to? Totally seamless, all tech, journey. But then the guest would need to have that expectation. When I go there, this is what my journey is. And I'm okay with that. But then that might mean you don't need to have front desk, right? And I don't know if that's where you were headed, Trevor. That's where my mind started to go.
No, that's good. I like that. Yeah, and I think it depends on your property and your value proposition that you offer. If you're a luxury property, that's probably not going to fly. But if you're in a different tier and you're dealing with I'm going to call it a psychographic, not a demographic, a psychographic. I have an 89-year-old father who sends me texts on a regular basis saying, "Hey, check out this app, download this thing. It can do this, that, the next thing." So he's psychographically, he's sort of much younger than his years. And if you got the right kind of target audience you're going after, then absolutely that relying on that tech experience would be a good way to go. I will say there's one caveat though, and I've been very fortunate to travel quite a bit even during COVID, stayed at some interesting properties. And I found it really annoying if I'm working with tech and I'm completely comfortable doing that with check-in and, texting for room service, whatever it might be. But if I don't get a quick response from a human, then or if I call the front desk and I do want to speak with a human, then I expect that sort of really fast response. So you've got to have kind of both. If you're going to rely on tech, that's great, but you also have to have that human backup as part of the equation. And if you're missing that, then you're probably going to be irritating your guests more so than anything else. Whoever's driving the slides, do you mind going to the next slide, kind of going through this one really quick, and then the next slide has that price value. So the next one has the price value on its chart, if you would. Thank you. So this is an exercise that we go through with our client properties. And what we do, and this is a bit of an eye chart here, but on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we do plot a composite average of our guest satisfaction feedback or star ratings that we're getting back from various sources. So we might look at a booking.com or Expedia, the TripAdvisor, Google, whatever it may be. And then we do a composite average of how our competitors stack up to us. So our properties, it's squarely in the middle of this window pane right here. And then the colorful boxes that you see around it would be our competing properties. And then we also then pick a certain set of dates. So back to Patrick's point earlier, longer lengths of stay, for example, you might want to do a 5-night rate shop or a 1-night rate shop or whatever it might be. But whatever your time frame is that you're shopping, just take a look at how your competitors stack up relative to yourself. Bottom left-hand corner is lesser quality properties from a valuation perspective, and lower pricings, logical. On the top right-hand side, higher guest satisfaction, higher ratings, logical. Top left-hand quadrant, it means that one of two things, either those properties that are in the top left-hand quadrant, which are lesser quality than you but higher price, are vulnerable to losing business to you, and or your pricing's too low. And then conversely, the bottom right-hand corner, those that are a little stronger than you at a lower price, you're vulnerable to losing business to them. So really anything at the 45-degree angle from the bottom left to the top right is sort of a logical marketplace that you're operating in. And this is a great tool to use when you're having discussions around price positioning and the price value relationship that you see in your marketplace when you're dealing with owners or other key stakeholders. Pulling out a chart like this would be helpful. In this instance here, we might advocate for the property to drive rate a little bit to kind of get between that yellow triangle and the pink box in the top right-hand corner. That might be a good position. There may be some additional rate potential without sacrificing occupancy. So we use this when we're using social media feedback, if you will. But I would also recommend you do it if you're thinking about individual market segments. So if you're looking at the leisure travel, what kind of leisure traveler? Is it going to be couples? Are you going to look at families? Are you looking at multi-generational leisure travel? You're looking at business travel? You're looking at groups? If so, what kind of group? And if you have a really objective viewpoint of where your strengths and weaknesses are vis-a-vis your competitors, then you can actually substitute the x-axis with some of those quality scores as well, and really come up with really what you should be doing from a price positioning perspective in the marketplace. Again, sometimes if you look at this burgundy dot at the very top at the 165 range, whatever it might be, that may just be a market leader in the marketplace. They're kind of like the Rolex in the marketplace, and although they are competing in that particular market, they have enough unique attributes to stand on their own. They're special in their own right. They have a different target audience that they're going after. So when we talk about dynamic pricing and price positioning, sometimes it makes perfect sense to consider your comp set, and other times it doesn't. So you just need to know your strengths of your own property for the market segment that you're going after and determine when you want to play ball and when you don't.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Trevor. We're coming up kind of close to the top of the hour, and I do want to make sure that we leave everybody with some great takeaways and share our next event. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then if anyone has, I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. If I know we've gotten a good amount coming in from the group. So really through all this, I want to leave everyone with some thoughts for the future that they can take away. But given all of this discussion on the changes, is it sustainable, the function of price moving forward, and how will that affect the prices of dynamic pricing? Specifically, how would it affect the prices on deciding if a destination becomes unsustainable? What are some new sustainable destinations that we can try to move towards that are sustainable? Where, if it's not sustainable, where is?
I'll try and take on some of that. So I think during the budget season, this was probably the most debated topic, was how pricing can sustain, how it'll look next year, given, again, mostly in resort markets, how strong 21 was. We wouldn't see a compounded 30% growth in rate, for example, for 22, but what is that threshold? And so far, we've been surprised. I think a lot of it's been based on it's been pretty evident that it's hard to get a room pretty far out, and during peak periods, guests are getting a little more savvy, and we're picking up on it and testing a little more. So testing is certainly important. Having good BI tools for your call center metrics, your websites, how you can marry those business point, those units together to look at your true demand and how you're converting for specific days and why you might be turning guests away. That's still going to be very important. And these are all outside of an RMS. It's some of the human element and research is still needed. The things we've talked about flights and Google searches to your market. There are a lot of tools that will provide you that to understand, is that demand still coming back to my market? If so, how am I getting my future share of that? And a lot of what Trever just mentioned is very important too. What were our guest reviews from last year or the last several months? What's that trend line look like? Because that will indicate how you can continue to hold pricing against your competitors, since so many of them will still continue to learn about you for the first time through Google searches, through OTAs, meta search engines, you name it. That's how they'll still learn about you, as well as word of mouth. So how do we do the past year in our guest surveys? We talked a lot about stripping out amenities. How did that impact the guest experience? And if it wasn't good, how do we speak to them moving forward and kind of bring that ship back forward? Because if that was done poorly in the past, it will hurt you moving forward. We've had properties show that so far, that if they had a poor summer with guest experience, operations was stretched too thin, they might be seeing pace falter immediately as a result. Their repeat business starts going elsewhere. So I know that's a lot right there, but those are some metrics that we're considering when looking at the holistic picture of how to carry the property's value and its price positioning versus competitors and even other markets that might not have been up for debate a couple of years ago, as Tom said.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patrick. Heather?
It's almost like you're defining like how, are you a desirable destination, right? And like establishing all those components like good reviews, maybe high design, that there's this experiential thing that people want to go there for, right? Like we talk about, people went to these maybe odd, very tertiary markets in the middle of nowhere over the last 2 years. Will people still go there? So I don't really have an answer to the question, like, is it sustainable that cabin keep charging this high rate that they've been able to get because people wanted a social distance? But that now they've established themselves like as a destination potentially, right? So they do have a chance to sustain it. I think the risk is, will international travel pick up? People that chose that trip did because they couldn't choose something else. So now will some of that wane? But I think the moral of the story is like, it is sustainable if you have that formula of that just destination, right? It's desirable and you stand out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I think we're all at time. I'll make one call for a question from the audience. First come, first serve. Anybody? Throw it in. Either on your audio or on the chat.
Okay. I'm curious what Trever thinks.
Yep, I'll be
sustainable.
I'll be really fast. Pull up my crystal ball. It depends. and I think that's why we're talking about dynamic pricing. We really don't know what the future will hold. If I was to predict it based on what we're seeing today, very quickly, lumpiness in the first quarter, some strength returning, especially in the group segment. We're seeing a lot of mask mandates are lifted, a lot more corporate group short-term coming in. That's going to blend in nicely with our leisure demand patterns we'd be all enjoying in the summer months, especially in the markets that we're talking about here. Return to corporate travel will continue to accelerate in fourth quarter in the absence of any black swan event. The Fortune 100 companies with their duty of care will start to allow guests to come or travelers to come back as guests to our properties in the fourth quarter. We're going to start to see some Smurf activity in addition to corporate business happening as well, and then starting moving more towards citywides and other larger events in 2023 and beyond. But to navigate all that, you need dynamic pricing.
It all sounds really positive, though.
It's a great closing remark. Thank you, Trevor. We definitely do need dynamic pricing, and it remains dynamic, and it is still remains to be dynamite, where you just don't know when. You got to be careful because you just can't predict what's going to happen. So thanks everybody. Great discussion. I think we could go on, but we're at the hour. I did want to announce we have our in-person event coming back next month at the end of March in Myrtle Beach. So everybody, it's a great opportunity to come down to the Grand Strand, come to our big destination in the Grand Strand and see everybody in person. We'll be sending out an invite soon. It's going to be a collaboratory event with the Chamber and the RMA down there. So really excited to bring this education to such a big concentrated market of hospitality professionals in the Carolinas. And that's it. Jason, final announcements?
Yeah, one last note, if you're not a member, like I mentioned earlier, we'd love to have you become a member. Or if you're interested in becoming a sponsor of one of our events, reach out to someone on the team, visit the website hsmaisouthcarolina.org, or email Jay McLaurin. Email address is here on the screen. Just two other notes that's kind of new for 2022. We do have a student, faculty, and retired membership pricing. You can see that here on the screen, as well as a new HSMAI and MPI dual membership, which is now 20% off. So for more information on that and to learn more, you can visit us at hsmaisouthcarolina.org.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. This is a pleasure, and I really appreciate it. So everyone have a great week, and we'll hope to see you in March in Myrtle Beach.
Bye.